The following books, stories, plays, poems, or limericks you will hear on Right Time Radio are the intellectual property of the writers and authors mentioned. Any copying, recording, or reproduction of this work is strictly prohibited without the express written consent of the author. The content of this show is the individual expression of the author and does not necessarily reflect the views of the owner of this radio station.
It's the right time for Right Time Radio. I'm Tom.
And I'm Lynn. Today's story is an excerpt. It's actually part 2 of the excerpt of the the charm fable, Mousie and the Golden Book by Nicholas S. Casal. And it's published by Alpine Line Publishing in Colorado Springs. And we are going to get right into it. So take it away, Art Evans.
Well, first, we'll start with...
Take it away, Tom.
We left you last week with our friend Mousie deciding that he had no choice but to join the nocturnal patrol. Nick was glad and told Mousie, "You are my apprentice." Mousie's guts turned at the words, but he buried his emotions deep. He had a feeling he'd have to stomach a lot of wrong before he got his chance to flee. Now we continue with our excerpt from the charm fable, Mousie and the Golden Book by Nicholas S. Casal.
With a painful groan, Mousie rose from his cot in the barracks. He'd barely heard the wake-up bell. The alarm's tone had been chosen specifically to wake bats, creatures with far better hearing than Mousie had. As he looked around the barracks at the other trainees, he couldn't help but wonder how so many of them seemed unaffected by the many weeks of arduous training that they'd all gone through together. Perhaps it was the way they all hung upside down at night, while Mousie slept curled up on his cot. The cot itself was an uncomfortable thing that all the other recruits had begrudgingly made for him. Every night, they got up at the crack of dusk, while just a hint of golden light still peered over the western sky, and jumped into their physical exercises. On the positive side, those first few minutes did allow him to see the sunlight, even if it was only briefly. How he missed the blue skies. Like the rest of them, he was up and into his training uniform by the time Lieutenant Nick entered the barracks, his paws folded behind his back. The lieutenant stood 5 paws widths shorter than most of the recruits. All except Mousie, actually. Still, none of them dared to eye him as he passed by. Even furless pups knew that could lose him a day's rations. Lieutenant Nick walked by each of the recruits, looking them up and down. He stopped at one, leaned up, and shouted in his face, "Recruit, you were denied rations yesterday. Why do I smell fish on your breath?" "I don't know, Lieutenant," said the recruit. All the while he stared straight over Nick's head. "Don't lie to me, pup," shouted Nick, his saliva speckling the recruit's cheeks. "Who shared your rations with you?" "I'd rather not say, sir." "Well, you are about to, pup," said Lieutenant Nick, "or I am about to deny this whole unit their rations." "It was me," Mousie cried out. He glanced back and forth at the other recruits. Though none looked at him, he could tell that a few of them had winced, knowing the fate that likely awaited him. "I mean, it was I, Lieutenant." Lieutenant Nick stopped over to Mousie and glared down at him. He lifted the visor off his nose and snarled. There was rage in those eyes. Mousie felt as if he was staring into an avalanche about to crush him. "Did I address you, recruit?" Nick yelled. "No," said Mousie, struggling to keep his gaze away from Nick's face. "I can't hear you, recruit," Nick shouted again. "No, sir," Mousie squeaked, a little louder this time. The other recruits stifled their giggles, clearly amused by Mousie's small voice. All too often he'd heard their mixed jabs of and adoration. At best, his voice was simply cute or funny. At worst, it reminded them that he was not truly one of them, and that was reason enough to bully him. "You will speak when spoken to, recruit," Nick yelled. "Do you understand?" I do, sir," squeaked Mousie again. More stifled laughter from the recruits. Nick turned back to the rest of them. "Even so, this recruit's honesty is to be admired. For his sake, I will not confiscate anyone's rations today. However, since none of the rest of you were loyal enough to your comrade to sacrifice any of your meals for his sake, I will make everyone fly an extra lap before breakfast. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, Lieutenant," the recruits all said in unison. Fly an extra lap. Mousie thought he'd never see the day when flight was considered a punishment. One more thing he knew separated him from his peers. Since they'd been able to fly most of their lives, it was nothing special to them. But as a mouse, he could enjoy experiences the other recruits took for granted. At least that's how it used to be. He flew 4 laps around the tower that night before breakfast. That many times in such a wide circle, he felt he could begin to understand why this was punishment. How much easier this would be with an airship. Further, there was the humiliation of being so far behind any of them, out of breath by the time the 3rd lap began. Worst of all, flight was such a tease. Flying around the outside of the tower was a cruel reminder of how free he should have felt. There were no walls between him and escape, but he knew the woods were full of archers lying in wait who would shoot any attempted deserter out of the sky. Then came breakfast itself. Always fish. Mousie hadn't minded fish when he'd first arrived at the tower, but after so many weeks, he'd grown so sick of it and longed for fruit, nuts, or honey. He'd even settled for cheese, terrible as that stench was. All day he trained, improving the strength of his muscles. Though he was far behind the other recruits, he sparred with wooden swords, which usually meant he was on the receiving end of a terrible beating from his fellows. He climbed ropes and over walls and ran on an enormous wheel. And all the while, every other recruit was so far ahead of him.
We will return to the charm fable, Mousie and the Golden Book, after this break. Keep it right here on 1400 KRLN. This is Right Time Radio. It's First Friday in Canyon City. Dave and Linda Lambert of Canyon Signature Mortgage invite you to join in the festivities, featuring the debut of local artist Marcal, along with the vibrant and colorful works of Roseanne Gain. Strumming his guitar to set the mood for the evening will be Craig Johnson. Bring your family and friends down to celebrate First Friday the right way at Canyon Signature Mortgage, 715 Main, tonight from 4 to 7.
Come enjoy art
at 715 Main.
Canyon Signature Mortgage.
Fremont County Public Health has issued a health alert after 3 residents have contracted hepatitis A. Hepatitis A patients exhibit symptoms of fatigue, low appetite, nausea, and jaundice. Homeless people and drug users are at high risk of exposure, and Hep A is transmittable by close personal contact. A Hep A vaccination clinic is set for Tuesday, April 9th from 10 until 1 at Mercy Today Ministries at 1336 Elm Avenue. You can also consult your own physician, local pharmacies, and Fremont County Public Health about getting hepatitis A vaccine. KRLN weather. We continue to warm up today under partly cloudy skies, about 3 to 5 degrees warmer than yesterday, and breezy conditions with southwest winds picking up this afternoon. A high today around 74. Mostly cloudy skies tonight, the low near 40. Then partly cloudy tomorrow, 30% chance of afternoon and evening showers developing. Tomorrow's high around 68. 44 was our low this morning after a high of 72 yesterday. 60 degrees currently at the Weather Center.
Talk Radio 1400 KRLN.
And welcome back. We now continue with the charm fable, Mousie and the Golden Book.
After physical training, they listened to a higher officer drone on about how some groups of rebels were meeting in secret. The teacher assured everyone that the rebels were no real threat. But this could change at any moment, and the Nocturnal Patrol needed to be ready to deal with that threat when the time came. Then there was dinner. Fish again. Mousy wished he was training in the tower with fruit bats rather than vampire bats. But there was his one solace of the night. Study time. The bats were each sent to the library to spend time poring over books. Technically, they called that room the archives, but Mousy preferred to call it a library. Most of the books there were tomes on tactics or the dull writings of previous Nocturnal Patrol commanders. Every now and then, though, Mousy would find one about older history. Most such books had simply been forgotten somewhere in the library. Mousy knew that if the archivist learned of these older books' existence, he'd have them replaced by newer editions right away. But the history was so different in the newer editions, and certainly nowhere near as exciting. Only the older versions of these stories told tales of heroic knights standing up for the weak, or famous artists changing society. Only the older texts told stories of the brave knights, Sir Charles the Bold, Sir Xerxes the Quick, Dame Provosti the Fearless, or Lord Conningata the Unstoppable. Certainly, the newer books were replete of most of the interesting tales, that of a book that could teach one the secrets of immortality. Mousy had been careful to keep his reading choice a secret, but Lieutenant Nick still caught him one night. To Mousy's surprise, the lieutenant only smiled at Mousy and whispered, "Be more discreet." That same night, Mousy found a hollowed-out, newer edition book in the library. From then on, he hid the books that he was truly reading in the larger book's gaps. But there was one such night in this library that proved to be far more precious than any of the others. Mousy had just finished reading the history of the Bear King. When he set the book down, he looked out the window and saw gold peering over the eastern horizon. "Dawn, I have to get to bed." He closed the book and crouched down in the aisles. So often he'd hidden his more valuable books this way. Bats had such a natural tendency to look up to the books on the top shelf. They barely even noticed anything around their feet. As Mousy crawled under the bookshelves, searching for a place to hide his new favorite history, he spotted a book he'd never noticed before. It was strange that he'd somehow missed it, for the book's cover was golden color, as were the edges of each page. Glancing back and forth to be sure no one was near, he pulled the gold-colored book closer to himself. He slipped it open and found himself nearly blinded as the white pages inside the book began to glow. "Mouse Fred Saurus," said a female voice from the book. But there was no echo. Underneath that bookshelf, there should have been an echo when the book spoke. Now that he thought about it, books typically didn't speak. "Only you can hear me, Mouse Fred," said the voice from within the book. "Who are you?" Mousy thought. If the book could speak directly into his mind, maybe he could do the same back to it. "My name is Sophia," said the book. Mousy gasped and smiled widely. "Well, you are a rare find indeed. I have read about magic books, but I never truly believe." "You believed something, otherwise you wouldn't hear me," said Sophia, her voice starting to sound desperate. "Mouse Fred, you need to take me with you. If the archivists find out about me, they'll burn me." "Why would they burn you?" Mousy asked. Is it really such a wonder? Came the almost sarcastic reply. Mousefred, you know they replace old books that say things they don't want you to read. You cannot be so naive. You must have noticed. Mousie stared at the book in puzzlement. He'd never really stopped to consider why the archivists were so adamant about getting rid of the old books. You're just now realizing, the book said. Her voice sounded a touch sad. Oh dear, I've much work to do. Work to do? Mousie asked, raising an eyebrow. What exactly are you trying to accomplish? I'm rescuing you, said Sulphur. Mousie paused for a moment, considering her words. I thought it was you who wanted rescue from me. Rescue me so that I can rescue you, said Sulphur. Before Mousie's eyes, the book shrank until it was small enough to fit on the pad of his paw. Put me in your pocket. Get me out of this library and I will save you from this tower. A distant alarm sounded, the signal that all recruits had only minutes to be in bed or they would be punished severely. He shoved the tiny book into his pocket and rushed off to the barracks. She appeared to him in a dream as he slept the next day. Sulphur's form had the shape of a mouse in a long white dress. The folds and ribbons of her gown were rolling sheets of paper covered in the most elegant calligraphy. Her tail was a long red ribbon, just like the book's attached bookmark. Her face and paws were made of golden light, and her eyes were like splatters of blue ink. Under Mousie's paws, the ground felt like parchment. And as he took in his surroundings, he realized the two of them stood upon an open pages of an enormous book. Thank you for rescuing me, said Sulphur, her voice soft and warm as it had been when Mousie had first heard it. It's no trouble at all, said Mousie, scratching behind one of his ears. As I said, in turn, I shall rescue you, Sulphur spoke. Our time together has been brief, but already I know this much about you. You are far too kind of heart to want to be part of the Nocturnal Patrol, or any of Queen Felicia's army for that matter. Mousie sighed and nodded his head. That's true. I want nothing to do with it, but I haven't found an opportunity to escape yet. I will provide you with your escape, said Sulphur. But first, I must know where to start. Tell me, Mousie, what do you know about magic? I know that it exists, Mousie shrugged. I've read many stories about famous wizards, sorceresses, and enchanters who've had great influence over history. Beyond that, I don't really know anything. Sulphur nodded her head. So, you have so much to learn. Let us start with the basics. Magic is based on two things, imagination and knowledge. You bend reality to your will using the force of your imagination. But in order to change the world, you must understand it. Furthermore, the more you know, the more you can imagine. Sulphur raised her right paw, gesturing to the pages on which they stood. Here in my world, magic comes far easier than it will in the real world. Mousefred, I want you to imagine something for me. Something from one of the other books you've read, or something from your past. Just make sure that whatever it is, it makes you feel safe. Mousie looked down at the paper floor and thought for a moment. Something that made him feel safe? He'd not thought about anything pleasant for a long time, aside from what he'd read in the books. But now, as he thought back on it, he remembered his mother's farmhouse. He recalled the dandelions growing all around the little hovel, and the sounds of laughter wherever his brothers and sisters were at play. He recalled the smell of baked bread, just fresh out of the oven, and the sound of distant sparrow songs.
You're listening to Right Time Radio, brought to you each week by Fremont Regional Hospice. We'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue with the charm fable, Mousie and the Golden Book, right after this.
There are many misconceptions still surrounding what hospice is. I'm giving up is just one of the myths still hanging on. Despite hospice being around for many years, many untruths continue to remain. At Fremont Regional Hospice, we want you to know that you have options when it comes to your care. If you're unsure how hospice can help you, please call us at 719-275-4315 or stop by at 1439 Main Street in Canyon City and ask to speak to one of our knowledgeable staff. Fremont Regional Hospice, your hometown hospice since 2006.
Oh my, I have worked and I still can't get my safe open. Captain Keyman,
call the professionals in Middick's Locksmith Shop. They can get into your safe really fast.
how fast could he get into my safe?
Most of the time, they can get into your safe in under 2 hours.
So how do I get a hold of Middick's?
Just give them a call at 275-7787. I must go now and help others in need.
Royal Gorge Radio's AM 1400 KRLN and Star Country 104.5 FM. And we, along with Fremont and Royal Gorge area businesses, proudly present our Customer Appreciation Day we call Money Day.
Hey, y'all, this is Chelsea Lynn inviting you to join me every Tuesday afternoon at 2:30 for your chance to win your share of free money.
That's right. A little cold hard cash could be yours. To win, simply be registered and present at one of these Money Day store locations.
Any Ulta convenience stores in the Fremont County and Royal Gorge areas. Classic Furniture, 510 Main Street, Canyon City. And Maggie's Candy Kitchen, 1326 Main Street, Canyon City.
So visit a Money Day store location, pick up a registration card, fill it out, and get it back to Royal Gorge Radio. Or go online at RoyalGorgeRadio.com to find out more. Then every Tuesday afternoon at 2:30, be at a Money Day store location. Listen for your name, hear your name, and call 276-0331 within 60 seconds to claim your cash. From Fremont County and Royal Gorge area businesses, AM 1400 KRLN and Star Country 104.5.
And welcome back. You're listening to Right Time Radio, of course, brought to you each week by Fremont Regional Hospice. We now continue with the charm fable, Mousie and the Golden Book.
Mousie could almost hear the sparrow's songs now, almost smell the baked bread. When he looked up, he realized why. Just beyond Sophia, there sat his mother's hovel, surrounded by dandelions. Smoke rose from the chimney, carrying the scent of bread. Tears welled up in Mousie's eyes as he stared at this haven of peace. Home. Oh, he had no idea until today just how delicious bread could smell and how beautiful that little farmhouse could look. He walked forward and stopped just outside the door. Sophia placed a paw on his shoulder. You were able to create this place in such detail because you're so familiar with it. You know this house more intimately than any place or anything in all the world. Will it disappear if I touch it? Mousie asked, his paw hovering over the door handle. At your current magical proficiency, yes, said Sophia. If you want to be able to open that door and walk around inside, you'll have to get better at magic. Practice more. I'll guide you every step of the way, Mouse Fred. Can you call me Mousie? He asked. I always feel like I'm in trouble when I hear my full name. If it will please you, I will, said Sophia. Mousie, I want you to try to imagine a few more things. Let's try something that makes you excited. And so, Mousie's magical education began. Every night, he endured nocturnal patrol training. But daylight hours, he spent his time learning magic, whether through dreams or by expanding his knowledge in the library. Weeks went by, and Mousie started applying what he'd learned in small ways in his everyday life. Even his training with the nocturnal patrol, he found himself doing better every day. He'd never forget the night he was among the first 3 recruits to finish their laps around the tower, and he saw a look of pride in Nick's eyes. He never thought of himself as seeking the lieutenant's approval, but the moment he got it, It just felt so wonderful. Remember, Wtr said one day, I'm teaching you magic so that you can not use it as a beast of the nocturnal patrol. I'm doing it so that you can escape from them. Yes, of course I remember, said Mousie. At the time, he thought it strange that Wtr felt the need to remind him of the true purpose of his magical training. Had he not shown every day that he wanted to leave this place? Had he not recreated his mother's farmhouse nigh every time he dreamed? Why remind him of his goal? His answer came with the next sunset. Mousie shuffled out of the barracks with the rest of the recruits, ready for another arduous night of training. He was already planning out what he'd do. He'd cause little gusts of wind to help him fly faster, or warp the climbing ropes so that he could get a better grip. But as he came out the door, Lieutenant Nick pressed the paw to his chest, preventing him from following the rest of the recruits. Not this time, Mousefred, he said. Mousie looked up at the lieutenant in confusion. You don't need any more training, said Lieutenant Nick. You are finally ready to become a member of the Nocturnal Patrol. Follow me. Mousie felt an uneasy mix of disgust and pride as he followed Lieutenant Nick up the nearest spiral staircase. They were headed to the roof, where many young recruits before him had sworn their oaths of loyalty and become nocturnal patrol beasts. The Queen herself has come here for this moment, said Lieutenant Nick. Mousie's mouth fell open, but he quickly snapped it shut again. His mind was abuzz with questions about the Queen, but he had learned better than to speak out of turn. Nick continued, make sure you bow when appropriate and avoid looking her in the eye like we taught you. Yes, Lieutenant, said Mousie. As they climbed ever upward, Mousie looked out each and every window that they passed. There had to be some way out of this place. But the windows were all barred, and the gaps between the bars were too small even for him to climb through. Even if he could get through, it was a long way to the ground. And even if he could get to his wings, which were still in the armory, and fly away, there were the archers in the surrounding woods to deal with. Wtr had taught him some truly amazing magic, but never anything so incredible that it would allow him to fight off so many archers at once. Maybe he could escape the first time he was sent on patrol. Mousie and Nick finally arrived at the roof of the tower. On either side of the two of them, dozens of bats stood at attention. Each were clad in black armor, with swords in hand, held out above Mousie and Nick's heads as a salute. Up ahead, Mousie saw a prisoner wearing brown robes with a burlap sack over his head. The prisoner had been forced onto his knees, and his wrists were tied behind his back. Beyond the kneeling prisoner stood the Queen herself. She was a cat with long black fur and was far larger than Mousie had imagined. She stood towering over every beast on the top of that tower, wearing a red and gold dress. She grinned at him, bearing a set of perfectly white and perfectly sharp teeth. Mousie shuddered as he realized how easily his whole body could fit in her mouth, trapped between those fangs. It was an unpardonable, a deep wrong to eat a thinking beast, but mice could not survive betting that all large animals kept such morality in mind at all times. There's no reason to fear my servant, said Queen Felicia. Her voice was so sweet that it made Mousie's stomach turn. Even one so naive as he could tell when kindness was false. This night you will join my army and help maintain order in this realm. No longer are you a lowly mouse. You are a bat of the Nocturnal Patrol. She raised the paw and extended a single claw. There is but one more test. Lieutenant Nick, would you do the honors? Yes, Your Majesty, said Lieutenant Nick. He turned to Mousie, drew his sword, and placed it in Mousie's paws. Every initiate has to execute a prisoner to show they are willing to do what is necessary. Mousie felt his gut drop. They expected him to spill blood. Truly, there would be no turning back if he went through with this. He looked down at his reflection in the blade. If he went through with this, he'd be a true monster, just like the rest of the Nocturnal Patrol. The blood would never truly wash off his paws or his soul. This isn't what Wtr trained me for. Nick walked over to the prisoner who knelt between Queen Felicia. He yanked off the burlap sack, revealing his face to Mousie. Mousie gasped. His friend looked even worse than he had the day they'd first met. His cheeks were sunken in. His skin was a paler shade of green, but it was definitely him. Queen Felicia expected Mousie to execute Sir Rene. The Toad King let us do as we wish with him. Mousie wasn't sure why Lieutenant Nick volunteered that information, but he forced a smile and nodded, the sword still in his paw. Nick walked over to Mousie and spoke in a low voice. Since saving this frog's life was your crime, ending it shall absolve your guilt. This is how you make things right. Secrets don't make friends, Queen Felicia giggled. Come now, pup. Show me that you're ready to join the Nocturnal Guard. Slay this frog and swear your oath to me. Mousie approached Sir Rene. Under his breath, he muttered, I thought you'd been in worse situations than this. How wrong I was, said Sir Rene. I trust, as my friend, you will make it quick. Mousie drew a sharp breath. Faced with certain doom, this frog seemed unfazed. He didn't beg or plead for his life, nor did he bargain as Mousie would have done. Mousie bit his lip and fought back the tears. All he wants is a quick end. With all eyes upon him, Mousie raised the sword high over his head, gripping it firmly in both paws. What could he possibly do to help his friend? Truly, this was the point of no return. If he slew this frog, he would be just as wrong as the rest of the Nocturnal Patrol. But if he did not, he was sure they'd execute him alongside his brave friend. Remember everything I taught you, Wtr's voice rang in Mousie's head. Use what you know to get out of here. Mousie thought back to any memory that could get him out of this. He hadn't yet learned to travel great distances in an instant, so going home was not an option. He stared down into Sir Rene's eyes, and he thought back to the day when he'd first met this frog by the stream. The stream? Of course. The stream that ran near Akbar, the place where he'd played so many times as a young pup. He knew it so well, and it held so many beautiful memories of that place. Mousie closed his eyes and focused on those memories. This would be their salvation. He heard the roar of rushing water, and when he opened his eyes, a charging stream poured over the battlements of the tower and spilled over the roof like a dam had just broken. As the bats all took off into the air in panic, Queen Felicia fled, hissing and cursing from the rushing river. Mousie used the sword to cut Sir Rene's bonds, Brace yourself, Mousie shouted, just as the cold fluid crushed over them. At first, the waters pulled them under. Mousie didn't know up from down and flailed his arms frantically, not sure which direction to go. But Sir Rene grabbed hold of him and pulled him to the surface. The force of the stream carried them away toward the other edge of the tower. Only then did Mousie realize how ill thought out his plan truly was. Once the water spilled them over the edge, they would have a long way to fall. Hold on to me, Sir Rene shouted. Mousie wrapped his arms around Rene's torso and held on as tightly as he could. The water broke through the battlements on the other side of the tower, and Mousie and Sir Rene spilled over the side. Mousie closed his eyes, terrified of the impending fall into oblivion. But they stopped falling almost instantly. Water still poured over their heads, but they did not plummet as Mousie expected. When he opened his eyes, he saw that Sir Rene had caught himself on the wall of the tower and with great difficulty was able to hold on in spite of the waterfall beating down on them. Sir Rene leapt from that spot on the wall and attached himself to a window a little further down. Of course, Mousie had read about this. Many frogs had fingertips that could stick to smooth surfaces like suction cups. A mouse dares to use magic in my kingdom, came Queef Felicia's voice, a roar from above. Find them, slay them. Bats flew out all around the top of the tower, and their high-pitched screeches filled the air. Flee, they'll find us, Mousie squeaked, a little louder than he'd intended. One bat turned his head to the two of them, and with sword and claw, dove at them. Sir Rene pushed off the wall and allowed the two of them to drop 2 stories before clinging to a window again. The sudden jolt at the end of the drop caused Mousie to lose his grip, and he fell from Sir Rene's chest. Below him was the ground, and Mousie could do nothing but watch as it hurtled towards him. Another sudden jolt yanked Mousie back up into the air. Something sticky and slimy around his ankle ripped him back up to Sir Rene's shoulder. When Mousie looked at his amphibious friend's face, he spied the frog's tongue slipping back into his mouth. Hold on as tight as you can, Sir Rene croaked. Don't be afraid to hurt me. Mousie nodded, climbed onto Sir Rene's back, and wrapped his arms around his torso again. He couldn't lock his paws together on the other side, for they didn't quite meet. Instead, he grabbed the rope belt around Sir Rene's waist and prayed that it would be enough. A bat dove at them. Sir Rene ducked under the bat's stab. As the nocturnal patrol beast flew past, the frog lashed out with his tongue and snatched the sword from his claw. With the sword in one hand, Sir Rene dropped again, but only fell 1 story before he gripped another window. The sudden stop wasn't quite so jarring, and Mousie was able to hold on this time. Another bat swooped down to attack Sir Rene. The frog knight parried with a sword that he'd stolen and bashed the bat on the helmet with a pommel. The bat, disoriented by the blow, crashed into the wall and then plummeted to the ground beneath them. Another drop brought the two of them closer to the ground. Then another and another. An arrow snapped on the wall beside them, and Mousie looked down to see a cadre of weasels with longbows down below. They each knocked arrows and took aim at Sir Rene and Mousie. Sir Rene would never be able to get them down in time. Mousie had to solve this problem himself. He looked down at a window below them, closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the window shattered as a river poured forth from within the tower. The waterfall crashed down on the archers below, and they scattered out of the way. Amazing, croaked Sir Rene, climbing down the wall toward the rushing water. I didn't know you were a wizard. Mousie simply nodded. Can you freeze the stream? Sir Rene asked. Mousie closed his eyes and thought back to last winter when he'd gone ice skating with his brothers and sisters on the shortest day of the year. It was so cold, but Mousie thought the ice and snow were beautiful. The way the icicles hung off the tree branches, the way the frost sparkled in the sunlight, and the patterns of ice on the stream near Akbar. When he opened his eyes again, frost clung to the tower's wall, and the stream below had turned into a frozen waterfall, with icicles hanging below. Sir Rene dropped down onto the frozen stream and crouched, allowing himself to slide down it on his feet. As the two of them rode the ice downward, Mousie's heart raced, and in a flash, he remembered the time the ice proved thinner than he and his siblings had expected and Button fell through. No sooner had the memory wormed its way back into the forefront of his mind than the ice crackled and popped. Mousie yelped and flailed, terrified that the ice would shatter beneath them. But Sir Rene held him fast until they reached the ground. Mousie slipped off Sir Rene's back, and his paws met the solid ground. For the first time in months, he touched free soil. But he had no time to celebrate just yet. There was a bright flash of light behind him, followed by a deafening roar of thunder less than a second later. Mousie clasped his paws over his ears and started to run. Sir Rene followed. Another bright flash, this time right in front of them. The thunderclap shook Mousie's whole body. You were right, shouted Sir Rene as the two of them continued to flee. She is a terrible sorceress. The Queen called the storm? The young mouse found himself in a mix of awe and terror at such power. Mousie and Sir Rene soon reached the cover of the trees where the Queen and her minions were less likely to see them. But Mousie remembered as one of his mother's lessons. Never hide under a tree in a lightning storm. They were hidden, but far from safe. Another thunderclap, and a burning branch fell in Sir Rene and Mousie's path. Sir Rene grabbed Mousie and leapt over the flaming limb through the pitch-black smoke. Mousie coughed and rubbed his eyes to be rid of the tears. We need another river, shouted Sir Rene. Another thunderclap, and a tree nearby split in half. Sir Rene covered both his own and Mousie's faces as splinters flew at them. Can you do it? Sir Rene asked. Mousie nodded. He looked up at the canopy of trees and closed his eyes and focused again. One of the trees burst open and a waterfall poured forth. The river ran along the forest floor until it found Sir Rene and Mousie. The waters caught them up and rushed them away. More trees fell as lightning struck all around, but the branches kept the bolts from reaching the waters. The river Mousie had conjured soon fed into another river, one that had already been there. And he and Sir Rene swam away, letting the river take them far from Queen Felicia and her minions.
This concludes our two-part excerpt from The Charm Fable, Mousie and the Golden Book by Nicholas S. Casal.
We'll be right back with more Right Time Radio after these words.
Hi, I'm Lobo Loggins, and I'd like to invite you to join me every Monday from 10 till 6 on 1400 KRLN for Blue Monday. That's right, every Monday I'll be playing your favorite blues artists from B.B. King to Stevie Ray Vaughan, plus giving you a little history on some of these great blues artists. It'll be something new for KRLN, but it's gonna be great. Please join me every Monday from 10 till 6 for Blue Monday on KRLN 1400 AM.
Spring and warmer temperatures have arrived. Your vehicle should be ready. Zerby Automotive's $49.95 spring special includes a full safety inspection, lube oil and filter change, and tire rotation. Zerby's will inspect and test for coolant protection level, pH level, and leaks, radiator cap, AC output, the charging system, and your brakes. Call Zerby Automotive at 275-2523 to make your appointment today. At Zerby's, we get you ready to go.
Three Links Apartments are committed to providing quality, independent apartment living for age 62 and over and disabled individuals who qualify. Spacious one-bedroom and studio apartments with emergency pull cords located near the hospital. Three Links Apartments are HUD subsidized, so rent is based on income. For more information, call 269-9134 or visit them at 1300 North 15th Street in Canyon City. Complies with Federal Fair Housing Act and Equal Housing Opportunity. Three Links Apartments.
KRLN weather, partly cloudy, warmer and breezy today with southwest winds 10 to 20 this afternoon. The high today around 74. Mostly cloudy tonight, the low near 40. And partly cloudy tomorrow, 30% chance of afternoon and evening thunder showers. High tomorrow around 68. 72 was our high yesterday with a low this morning of 44. Currently 63 degrees at the Weather Center.
Talk Radio 1400 KRLN.
Welcome back to Right Time Radio. Lynn Donovan and Tom Bruno, of course, are the producers of Right Time Radio and put it together every week. Thank you for doing that. We really appreciate all the time you put into it.
It's a lot of fun.
All right, take it away, Lynn.
Thank you. Listen, we want to thank Art Evans for an excellent read 2 days in a row for our show.
Great job, Art.
Really good job. Really good job. Thank you so much, Art. And in our studio, we have the author of this story. It's Nicholas S. Casal himself. And Nicholas, if people really, really like this story, where can they go to get this, to buy it?
Well, two places. There's www.alpinelinepublishers.com. That's the actual publisher's website, and you can order it there. You can also find it on Amazon if that's hard to remember, and you can just remember my name or the book title easier.
And we'll put a link to that on our website too. So if you haven't memorized our website, it's righttimeradio.my-free.website, and you can get that. If you can't remember that, email us righttimeradio@gmail.com, and we'll tell you where it is.
You bet, Lynn. We hope you've enjoyed today's show. We're on every Friday at 10 a.m. on KRLN 1400. We want to thank KRLN and our sponsors.
Welcome. Thank you, Carrie.
Every Friday at 10. Hey, and also, if there's some budding authors out there, we'd love for you to send in your work so that we can evaluate it and possibly put you on the radio. As you see, we have a lot of great narrators, and we've had voice actors on already. This is our fourth show, and it's going really well.
Yes, very well.
So
I was wanting to talk to Nicholas for a little while because I think, as an author, it would be really cool to get to hear my story read by someone like this. Was this an interesting experience for you?
Yes, certainly, especially with this one, because these are games that I used to play with my friends at school when I was a kid. To have that turn into a book and then to have that read aloud on the radio is very exciting.
Yeah, well, it's a really good story. In fact, I shared this with you earlier. I'm going to be spending some time with my grandchildren in about a month, and I'm planning on taking this on my Kindle and reading it to them. And I think they're really going to enjoy it because it's just such fun little characters. So thank you so much for writing this.
Oh, thank you. It's fulfilling the promise to my childhood self, and I guess that has helped other people too.
Right, it has a good merit, I'll tell you.
So what are we doing next week, Lynn?
We have got a reading by the actual author herself. The author is Dana Lynn Spencer. A lot of you know her, Dava Lynn. I'm sorry, Dave Lynn. I say your name wrong all the time. She is actually a friend of mine, and then I go and mess up her name. And I met her at a book signing several years ago, and we asked her to bring one of her books, and she is going to come with the Canyon City Chronicles, which is a 3-book group of stories, and she is going to read it herself, a couple of chapters, because it'll be an excerpt of it because it's too much. But I'm really excited about having David Lynn here. She's a really neat lady.
Yes, every one of these stories is obviously a little bit different, and that's what we're trying to do is include all these local authors. Colorado is considered local, but David Lynn is right here, really local.
Yeah.
Canyon.
These stories that she wrote are based on history that she researched. Of course, she changes the names to protect the innocent.
Or the guilty. Yes.
And we have an interesting one the week after as well.
Yes, and it's based on some real history in the area too, and it's about the Coal Creek Fire, and it's a drama, and it's written by Sue Haas, which we've had on our show before, and so it's going to be really good. We've got about 6 actors that are going to be working on that one.
Yeah, I think it's 7 actors, and it's 30 different characters, so it's going to be a real challenge for us, and we're real excited to do it.
A lot of fun. A lot of fun.
All right, and we are working with the high school too, and we will possibly have our high school students on for their final projects of the year. It's the senior class, and they're in writing drama right now. They're 10-minute dramas, so we'll have a few of them each week in the month of May until their graduation happens. So that's going to be fun too.
Well, that concludes our show.
So good writing, everyone, and have a blessed day.
All right, thanks for being with us. We'll be back next week from 10 to 11 on 1400 KRLN.